Welcome everybody to this Nedbank Topco Top Empowerment Masterclass. Good afternoon, all those people who had a busy Wednesday. We are over halfway, 60% through the week. So we're getting to where we want to be. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes while people trickle in. We have just under 600 people who have registered for this masterclass. So congratulations. I'm going to put in the chat. So have a look in the chat where you're from, who you are and where you're from. And my name is Ralf Fletcher, and I just want to welcome you to this masterclass. We have a couple of polls that we're running today, so look out for them. We do want to get your opinion. We also will be asking you to put any questions you have for our guest in the Q&A. So if you can find the Q&A for questions you have, and in the chat, if you can introduce yourself, where you're from and where you are. I'm sitting in Cape Town, and my name is Ralf Fletcher, the CEO of Topco Media. So, welcome to this very important masterclass, leading during times of uncertainty and flux. And it certainly feels like we're there at the moment. We're living through a period where leadership is truly being tested, and not in calm conditions, let me just say that, but in completely volatile and with rapid change. And I think in these sort of times, it's not that we all have all the answers, but with clarity, calm, conviction, we need to rise to good leadership. So welcome. This masterclass is designed for executives, for team leaders and entrepreneurs navigating these volatile environments. So if we can move to the next slide. My name is Ralf Fletcher, as I mentioned. So a little bit about Topco. Our purpose is inspire the world to do good business. And how do we do that? We research, recognize, and celebrate South Africa's leading organizations through our award programs, through our publications and conferences. And, and what do we do with that information is we share these insights from these great leaders, as with our guest today, the Chief Operating Officer at Nedbank, Mfundo Nkuhlu. So that's sort of what we do and how we do it. These are some of the brands and the communities that we serve. Obviously, Top Empowerment is where we are talking from today. Top Empowerment has been going for just over 20 years, almost 25 years. And we're very, very fortunate to be partnering with Nedbank on the Top Empowerment, both conference and the awards, which will be taking place on the 31st of July at Centre Convention Centre and the 1st of August. And that's in participation, that the host for that is going to be Leanne Manis. So we're also very excited if we can get to the next slide. Yeah, I mean, these are just some of the amazing people that have graced the cover of Top Empowerment, the publication. So it gives you an idea of the sort of people. But again, this masterclass is an insight from our guests and I suppose inspirational leader, really. Let me just tell you a little bit about Mfundo before he runs us through this masterclass. So thanks so much for joining us, Mfundo. But Mfundo joined Nedbank, when was it? 2004. Wow. And you've been the Chief Operating Officer since 2015. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of these challenges. He also serves on the board of Econet and Transactional Incorporated. I think what's important is that Mfundo is very closely involved in the oversight of the business strategies across Nedbank. Before joining Nedbank, Mfundo was executive responsible for strategy, revenue, and economic analysis at the South African Revenue Services. He's a chief director at the Department of Trade and Industry, where he's responsible for Africa and Middle East, as well as development and the coordination of the economic strategy for the new Partnership for Africa Development. I thought why this is so important is because he has both a public and a private and an international experience. So, welcome to this masterclass. Mfundo, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ralf. It's good to join you this afternoon and to share some thoughts on where we find ourselves in the world and what are the key leadership challenges of our time. And perhaps we can put the slide up, Shanti.
While we're doing that, guys, just let us know where you're coming from in the chat, please.
I suppose in where we find ourselves today, a key leadership challenge has to deal with the inevitability of uncertainty. We're all having to navigate a world characterized by higher levels of volatility and uncertainty, driven in large part by the speed of innovation and technological change, but also compounded by geopolitical tensions as the world shifts now from unipolar to multipolar centers of power. We see that competition playing out, introducing new sources of uncertainty. Even concepts and processes that we largely understood as part of globalization, we're discovering that they are not static. And so there's some reversal in some respects of the extent of that global integration and perhaps regionalization emerging as a stronger and competing force alongside that. That then compels us to think of uncertainty at three levels at the very least. At the strategic level, just where we're all headed and what's the overall direction of travel. Secondly, at the operational level, and so how do you lead your enterprise, even your country, in order to navigate that pathway? And at the personal level, how as human beings, how as individuals, we bring our leadership attributes to bear intentionally on the chosen pathway. And so that would be how I understand the nature of uncertainty and how it has also ramped up in considerable degrees. And in that sense, I suppose it's increasingly less about controlling the outcome, desirable as it is to understand where you're likely to land, but a lot more important to build adaptability. Because if uncertainty is a major feature, then it's going to be more important to have the resilience and adaptability to respond to changing circumstances all the time. Yes, sir.
Thank you for that, Mfundo. And it's happening at a staggering pace. I think that's the big thing. I mean, we said it's happening fast, but it's not one thing that's happening fast. It's everything happening fast.
It's everything happening fast. Speed of innovation, I've said. It's the emergence of new business models, which are overtaking established models. It's the dearth of requisite skill set in some respects. And so the changes happening in our environment happening a lot quicker than we're able to build the requisite skill set. And therefore, we're all having to reckon with new experiences whilst finding our way through them. And then, of course, the inevitability of it all is that just as individuals, nations also exist in competition with one another. Well, it's a combination of both competition and collaboration. And so those who are able to catch the wave early on, get a head start and competitive advantage and get ahead. And so that fuels then the race. as we all respond to the changes and adapt as quickly as we can.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, obviously, being in the media, what we're seeing is the impact of social media. And so information, we don't know what is true anymore or what isn't true. And as a leader, working with either your team or other people to define and articulate the truth. But I mean, in your experience, how can leaders better anticipate or prepare for uncertainty?
Yes, indeed. My appreciation of that is that, first of all, you need to be building your own capability, the capability of your own enterprise, being clear about your core set of skills and activities that are fundamental to the success of your business or enterprise. Once the core skill set and competences in place, it's relatively easier to adapt to changing environments. When you're not sure-footed, it seems to me far more difficult to anticipate what may come next. Now, the new change may itself be unsettling, but at least you're approaching it from being sure-footed in one respect about the competency levels, the robustness of your own organization, and organizational capability and business model, perhaps. And then you use that core strength and experience levels to engineer the adaptations that are required. It seems to me that is better accomplished from being strong in the first instance in the given area of enterprise.
And I mean, what we saw in certain, I don't know, situations like this, emergencies, turbulent times, is that executives are working around the clock to deal with these. And, you know, how have you as a leader dealt with this sort of leadership fatigue during these turbulent times yourself?
I reflected on 3 levels of uncertainty, including at a personal level. So, first of all, is to adopt the approach to life that learning is a lifelong enterprise. And therefore, there never comes a time when you stop learning new things. Oftentimes, we understand learning as the formal acquisition of knowledge. It is that, plus also the informal experiential acquisition of knowledge and insight. And so you've got to continuously invest in the ability to make sense of the world around you, to discern and identify new areas of opportunity, and to orientate your organization to be ready to take advantage of those when they come through. That's number one. Then number two, clearly, to your point, we exposed to mounds and mounds of data and information, and you would think that that is useful and helpful in one sense for decision making. On another level, it may not be. If the information is irrelevant or is derived from questionable sources, you can't then have the necessary level of confidence to use it for decision making. So you need to be clear about sources of data that one uses. In a business context, to have a clear sense of the one version of the truth. And so an ability to work through data and then to systematically create information on the back of that and insight. It is that level of insight that drives knowledge and provisions of solutions to clients on a sustainable and winning manner. So it's important to be rigorous about the sources of the data that we use, and then wrap the overall disciplines in using that data for decision making.
Thank you, Mfundo. I mean, it reminds me of, that continuous learning. In the I think it was 2009 financial crisis, there was a lot of jobs lost, and as a leader, it was a it was a horrible time actually. And I remember going back in about 2013, 2014, and reading examples or case studies of organizations who had really done well through that period. So who was then performing well after that. And it was reading those case studies about how they dealt with their people. So instead of firing lots of people, they put their whole workforce off maybe 2 days of work instead of losing 40% of their workforce. And so that continuous learning is important and knowing. But I mean, can you share a moment when your team was faced with a mix of strategic and operational uncertainty, and how you navigated that?
Yeah, there have been instances of that in the past, and perhaps even in current environment. We certainly know that our economy is growing much slower than any one of us would like. If you think of the challenges of our own economy, structural, some of those, you would want certainly higher levels of growth than the average 1% we've generated over the last decade or so. So there's something to be said and done about hitting higher growth rates and using those growth rates to mop up these exceptionally high levels
if you need any more
of unemployment.
Got it. If you need anything else to
and so we need higher levels of growth to mop up the exceedingly high unemployment rates, particularly in the formal sector of our economy. And so against that, you read and pick up headwinds everywhere. It's important in that context to be able to rally the troops to understand the reality that we're facing, perhaps our own assumptions about where the economy and the country would have been, those have not come to pass. Now, you can't throw in the towel and say the strategy is abandoned because the assumptions have played out differently relative to reality. The adaptability comes in exactly there. It's the speed with which you adapt to a new reality. And then, even in tough conditions of headwinds, find spaces to grow because that's the very nature of the market, which, in my view, is the ultimate arbiter. That there will still be others who are able to eke out value. And so headwinds by themselves is no justification not to continue to strive forward. So it's important, even in tough times when things are slow and uncertainty levels very high, that we go back to the basics. If we understand the basics very well, focus on high quality level of service to our clients, use our insights of the challenges that they have in order to help provide solutions that allow them to get ahead. As a business, we really grow on the back of the growth of our clients. It's when we provide them solutions to get ahead and meet their own objectives that we earn the right to share in the value so created. And so that's how I look at it. It is no different in uncertain times. Perhaps the challenge is more heightened, but fundamentally no different.
Awesome. I'm just wondering if Alex, you can launch the next poll so we can get everybody involved. Thank you to those who are putting where you're from and your organizations in there. We are going to be taking questions near the end. So if you have any question for Mfundo, please put it in the Q&A. There is a Q&A button at the bottom. Please put your questions in there. Alex, if we can go to the next slide to module 2. So we've got 7 modules to go through. We've got a limited amount of time. So if you guys can fill in the poll, and then let's go to question number 2, module number 2.
Okay. With respect to an adaptive mindset, it's important that as a leadership, we would develop this muscle. It's a muscle that really develops over time. And as I've already argued, the very sound starting point in my book is the inherent strengths that you have, being sure-footed in your current. That positions one well to adapt to a changing landscape. And in uncertain times, I do find that it's very, very important to demonstrate, to exhibit emotional intelligence. That means calm leadership style. At a time when everything is up in the air, everything changing, people do look for some sense of confidence, some sense of being grounded, some sense of being discerning and therefore able to make sound judgment and sound choices. And so calmness as an attribute is helpful for me. So in the midst of chaos, I still look for the golden thread that runs through the things that I do and finds connections in the issues that we deal with. That calmness actually has to be complemented by a level of curiosity, being inquiring, and so curious and never satisfied with what is. And so there's always the challenge that, yes, I'm competent at what I do now, but if I'm curious, exploring, then I can also leverage innovation in order to seek and fashion out new solutions. And so that's important that that is a part of the toolkit of a forward-looking leadership team that we always build our adaptability as we run our enterprises.
Yeah. I mean, you say calm. I noticed before this meeting, I had a quick 10-minute meditation. And so I'm just like, I'm interested in, you're always calm when I see you. So you make me calm. So what are the routine personal habits to stay grounded and resilient?
Yeah, it's important for me to also have time for myself. The work program is heavy. By its very nature, it never ends. But to be able to find time for reflection, for sense checking, it's important that the work that I do gives meaning and is meaningful. And so I do reflect on what it is that I do, why I do it, why is it important, and how best can I give of myself in order to achieve those goals. So if it's clear to me that it is important, it's clear to me that it makes a difference, and then all the more reason to keep my motivation levels up so that I can make the difference that I think leadership demands of me. In that context, of course, you've got to keep reading. And so I create time and space for acquisition of new ideas, testing of new concepts, and sometimes all by myself, and in other instances through structured interactions with others. Because new and great ideas don't develop in isolation. And so you've got to test those, sense check those, and all ultimately with a bent for the practical. It's all very well to be soundly grounded in the frameworks and theoretical disciplines, but a great deal of learning comes through practice. And so it's when new ideas, new propositions are put into action that you discover whether they work or not, and or things that you can tweak and still achieve the originally intended goal. All of this ultimately has to be intentional. I think there is intentionality about leadership. Things don't just drift into place, don't just happen by accident. The more we achieve them through deliberate intent and design, the more sustainable the change program is likely to be.
Yeah. I mean, that curiosity part as well. I mean, I suppose everybody's got their own personal biases. And so something I've heard recently is when you say no or don't like something, to explore that. But that's why those interactions with other people are also so important for that growth mindset, getting other people's views and opinions. One of the things I did want to ask you is, how do you encourage emotional intelligence and psychological safety in your leadership team?
Yeah, Ralf, leadership is a responsibility. It's a responsibility that you have to your organization. It's a responsibility that you have to your teams. And it's a responsibility you also have to yourself. And so occupying a position of leadership does not in and of itself translate to meaning that you're the best there is, or you know more than the rest. It doesn't. And therefore, for one's effectiveness as a leader, it's very, very important that you create space for multiplicity of views. If you're tapping into others' talents and experience, you've got to hear what they have to say about the problem at hand, how it can be approached, and how collectively you enrich one another through such sharing. Now, if we want to share views, then we have to accept that we may not necessarily agree at all times. And so you, as a leader, you must be thick-skinned enough to be tolerant of views of others. They may also challenge your own. And so you've got to anticipate that. And I firmly believe never to punish any member of my team for having a different opinion from mine. Of course, that's the starting point. Once a decision has been arrived at, we've canvassed all ideas, arrived at a decision, we've got to be single-minded about executing on it, because we can't execute effectively if we still have varied points of view. So the point about decision-making is to make us coalesce to a common and shared position, and that simplifies execution. So I always try to stick to that discipline. So you can't, in a moment of execution, still be exploring multiple ideas. and it's unhelpful in that sense. And so as a leader, you then have to do a roadmap for the team. Okay, we're in the phase now of exploration of ideas. We've crystallized a preferred position. We've made a call, decision has been made. Then we're rolling out our execution capability. And that is how I relate space and the safe space, space of psychological safety, if you like, for the team, with the disciplines and rigor of delivery.
I'm just wondering if we can share the poll results. I mean, here we go. So, what type of uncertainty challenges you most as a leader? So, all of the above, interesting, took out the top vote. But of the strategic, then operational, then personal, I wrote personal. Funny enough. So mine was personal, even though we weren't allowed to vote. What adaptive leadership traits do you lean on the most? Emotional intelligence, growth mindset won that. Humility and curiosity. I'm developing all three. So that's also interesting that growth mindset people are saying they're leaning on the most. Humility and curiosity, not as much. Maybe there's an opportunity for that. But I mean, we're going into the third module, shall we say, which is when faced with ambiguity, what do you do first? Reconnect with long-term goals, map out possible scenarios. And that's what you just said. Mapping out, we're starting in this phase, we're going to the next phase, the third phase, and use a decision-making module. Ask the team for input. That's quite high. I was surprised with that. And then 4, yeah. So what's the biggest enabler to team agility, cross-functional collaboration, and clear priorities and trust? Very, very interesting results. Should we go to module 3, Mfundo?
Yes, indeed. Let's proceed, Ralf. And here, the real issue is, in a sense, how do you provide strategic clarity in periods of chaos? In some respect, you can think of that as a contradiction in terms, but such is the reality that we live through. So in a sense, the chaos that prevails may also counter the strategic clarity that we yearn for. However, in conditions of heightened uncertainty, I think it's far more important, in my view, to always work with prospective scenarios. And so this is where scenario planning comes to be important. That would tell me that in times of uncertainty, we're not likely to accurately predict the future. It's even more difficult to predict that future without uncertainty. And so there's never quite an accurate prediction of the future. That is why scenarios come to play a role. So generally, you would have a base scenario. This is the way I see and understand the world. These are the resources at my disposal. Those resources may be human, maybe capital, maybe technological. And so this is how I intend to use them. But then you would flex that base scenario if your set of assumptions change by you can do weightings significantly different from what you had assumed. What are you likely to achieve? And then how do you respond to that significant change? That change may be positive, it may be negative, but you still need to respond. So even with the best laid out plans, which may well be the base case, you still need to have options that may be favorable and unfavorable. And therefore, you're preparing your organization for adaptability. That whenever one of these scenarios plays out, you're able to flex and shift the resources and how they are allocated such that the original objectives are largely accomplished or as near close to accomplishing them. The second point is always that the objective you set out to do doesn't change much over time, even with the changing landscape. But what you're ensuring and you're seeking to guarantee is that you achieve them or get as close to achieving them as possible, noting that the initial path that you may have mapped out may not necessarily be the one you pursue in practice. That is what agility implies for me in conditions of ambiguity and chaos. True attributes of leadership actually they get demonstrated in times of instability, in times of chaos. I suppose in good times the adage is that yes, good wave will lift all boats. But it's really in tough times when the tide goes out that you really show your mettle. And it's important that as a leader, you prepare yourself not just for one possible outcome, but at least multiple scenarios at play. And so you manage your organization, your people, your team with the requisite level of adaptability.
Yeah, I like what you said about using this scenario planning all the time and looking back on it even in bad times to adjust it. It's important to not do this when things are going wrong, but in fact when things are right, to plan for things going wrong.
Exactly. You still have to go back there.
And I mean, what frameworks do you personally use to stay focused amid chaos?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I've alluded to scenario planning. That's a framework. You play with the assumptions. You do these adjustments. Ultimately, you take time and play with them in your own right, alone. So, what if the market grows at this level? What if our performance comes through with this? How do we continue to up the ante in creation of value, delivering to market as promised? If not, what will that be? What will that delta be? And will it be within the realm of acceptability or not? And so you do that, but then you also use that to engage with others in your team. And so others may have a different starting point, a different set of considerations altogether. And the richness of the team comes through as we now panel beat these inputs into a coherent plan. So I find that in a very useful framework. Then you communicate and communicate and communicate. You can never communicate enough as a leader. When you think things are understood and self-explanatory, that's when you should even be more conscious of the need to communicate. Because oftentimes we work with the materials much more directly And so for you, it's self-explanatory. But for the
Yeah.
next person, they've still not really understood it the same way. And the further down the organization they are, they receive that message differently. Most of it largely from the vantage point of the position they occupy. So we can never communicate enough. And then there are different modes of communications to use. There are moments for town hall meetings, and so we do that. Then there are other times when you make use of technology for speed of communication, and sometimes it's far more direct and to the point. In other times, you seeking to provide context, meaning you're explaining things. But that is now for awareness and buy-in. If you want action, then that communication is more direct, clear, a sense of what is to be done and what the situation calls for. It's very, very important that both the mode of communication and the medium we're using for it lends itself to the goal that needs to be achieved.
So interesting. If you want action, be direct. Wow. I know we're limited with time and we've got still so many modules to go through. So maybe we need to just move to the next one and we can then get those questions. I see a couple of questions going into the Q&A. We'll go through them when we're finished. So get those questions in and please introduce yourself on the chat. So if we go to module 4, building agile teams.
Yes, in some respects, we've already touched on it. Ralf, we've spoken about the need for agility and adaptability. Oftentimes, I suppose agility gets borrowed from the tech world, and we kind of think of agile teams and agile organization from a technology stack point of view. That is but one part. Agility is a cultural mindset. And as we often say, culture, it's strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so it's more important that the organization is culturally attuned to what needs to be achieved. Then strategy mobilizes the teams in the achievement of that endeavor.
I mean, I suppose one of the questions I did have for you was really around, how do you create a culture? We're talking about culture. And I think it was Peter Drucker said that culture it's a strategy for breakfast, but where teams feel safe to fail fast and learn. How do you create that culture?
Again, this is not open-ended. You do want the organization not to be frozen by fear of failure. That's probably the one negative energy in any business. It blunts confidence, it blunts the ability to surge ahead. And so it blunts experimentation. And so you've got to allow the teams space to try new things. And oftentimes they may fail. And so you've got to have some tolerance threshold that some of the projects or initiatives may fail. But you can't allow for failure to the point of erosion of your capital. Then you won't exist as a business. If the majority of things that we do end up in failure, then we're not good enough, we're not competent enough for the roles we fulfill. So in that sense, you're really seeking to manage a ratio of success that far surpasses the rate of failure. But you allow the teams the freedom and space to explore new ideas, new thinking. That is the source of innovation. When people have confidence that they can explore new boundaries, they can stretch existing boundaries. And when value is realized through that, we all celebrate that. And at the same time, as a leader, you must have recognition that not every initiative is necessarily going to be a success. And so that is how you create space for experimentation, as well as empowerment of teams through decentralized decision-making.
Yeah. I suppose, we come to reality that not all leaders have all the answers, and not every project's going to be successful. So, because we can't anticipate the future. So I think it's creating that space that failure is okay. I mean, module 5 is communication that builds trust. I don't know if we can go to the next slide. And in the communication industry.
Yes, indeed. This is your domain in very many ways. But communication is a human skill. It's all ingrained in what we do. I do think that it's far more important to communicate with authenticity. That one ends, as a leader, one should earn the trust of one's team, and that people must be confident that you will communicate the situation as is, even if it is tough, that you will be in a sense, discerning, considerate about how you communicate, but authentic in communicating the actual reality. In skills that sometimes are less valued in the business world is skills of empathy. I think empathy between the leader and the led allows for greater connectivity, greater alignment. And that greater alignment is important as a foundation for fulfillment of a common purpose. And there are also clearly certain traits that we have, some cultural, including the ability in a business context to convey these critical messages in a storytelling discipline. It makes the message land, penetrate, and sink relatively easier in that way. And so these are some of the things that are important for me from a communications point of view.
Yeah, we have a saying here. It's called "with me." What's in it for me? So that empathy part is getting in the, I don't know, the seat of the person who's receiving the message and how you're doing that. But I mean, I doubt it. But is there any communication mistakes you've made as a leader? And so what did you learn from that?
Yes, they've been Ralf, a plenty. Well, one of the important things, I suppose, looking back, is to come to terms with the fact that reality is not just facts alone. It's not defined by facts alone. And so if all one ever did was to say, this is what I do, facts will speak for themselves, in reality, they do not. And so you then have to wrap around facts what the intent is, what's the purpose to be accomplished, what difference that will make, and then also wrap around all that you do a brand that also communicates in your absence. I think as we go up the leadership ranks, what becomes more important is how your work communicates for you when you're not around the decision table. And so facts are very important. The source of data that we use is critically important in the work that we do, but never enough.
I'm wondering if we can launch the last poll just to get the audience's feedback before we go into module number 6. And then again, we got 2 modules left. If people have got questions, if you can put it in the Q&A as well. If we can move to module 6.
Yes, module 6 I've already in some ways touched on it when I said the importance of providing calm leadership as you lead through a crisis, that you provide sense of steadfastness, a sense of resilience for the organization as you deal with higher levels of volatility, because uncertainty brings with it volatility. And so in all that storm, you're looking for calmness, resoluteness, sense of conviction and determination. And that confidence then rubs off on the rest of the team, so that even as we deal with unknowns, we deal with those from a position of being sure-footed about our capabilities and what we bring to the table. Of course, that is not being blind to the learning that will be required of us as we adopt to new challenges.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching a podcast the other day talking about possible nuclear attacks and how, talk about crisis response teams. And I wonder if do you practice these sort of situations with your team? And so far, what has been the biggest leadership test in a crisis you've had to endure?
Yes, we do these things, these exercises with our teams. In some respects, as a regulated industry, we're required by the regulator to anticipate the worst set of circumstances, and so they come and test our readiness, how we respond, how effective is our communication to the market, to shareholders, to the public, clients, users of our services, and how we do that in the midst of a crisis in a manner that still engenders confidence. Now, we've spoken about technology and its increasing importance in the modern economy. That technology comes with higher levels of risks. One of the risks we deal with every day is potential cybercrime. And you can never do enough on that front. You're only as good as yesterday. And when you think about that, you can't even use it as an area of competitive advantage. You can't bask on the fact that your competitor is been at the receiving end of a cyber attack, cyber threat, because it has contagion effect. It affects the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah.
And so we get worried about it if the attack is directly against ourselves, and we get worried about it when it is against others, because the ecosystem, the integrity of the ecosystem holds as a whole. And so those crises we've had to deal with. We've had moments of a breach, and that is when you see the organization rallying back to instill confidence, first of all, in ourselves, that we understand the problem and we're on top of it. We understand the source of the breach and how it happened. And we are able to restore confidence in the market assure our clients, assure our shareholders, assure our regulators that we're still a good enterprise, that the overall risk environment is mitigated in that sense. These are very real live risks that we deal with. Sometimes as a consequence of a breach or attack, it's not always attack, sometimes a breach, then your systems are down. We measure that rigorously, systems availability, because without that, we cannot do our business effectively and our clients cannot do theirs effectively. Those are the consequences of the modern economy. And so some of these good things do come with their own risks. The consideration always is that the risk associated with the solution should not be disproportionately higher than the good that the solution provides.
Thank you. I mean, we're under a bit of time pressure, so let's get to module 7 and we can start getting into some of these questions. They are looking very interesting. So thanks for those questions, guys. We'll get to them just now.
Yeah. With respect to module 7, it's really all about sustaining momentum. Okay, value creation is something that happens over time. So it's important to recognize that breakthrough, a success, is not just a momentary accomplishment. And our objectives is to make sure that it translates into sustained momentum over time. It also helps us to build resilience as an organization, making sure that today's success helps us to build muscle to withstand storms and headwinds that may lie ahead. Very important that we do this in a creative environment, in an organization that has a growth mindset, looking forward with anticipation and expectation of the period ahead. That said, it's equally important to ensure that we manage our teams to avoid burnout, and that the two dimensions to that aspect. One, you want to manage your teams to avoid burnout in their creativity, and therefore you allow them periods of rest to refresh, but also to pursue other life goals that are important to each one of us as individuals, and come back into the world of work rejuvenated and recharged. On the other hand, we also know that in order to ensure that our risk management disciplines are effective, it's important to regularly rotate our people. And so if you have a new pair of eyes and ears, they may see and look at the problem differently than the one set before them. And so there's a positive outcome, both for managing our energy levels as well as for mitigating associated risks.
So important. I often think we need a KPI for healthy employees because it serves the business. I think I heard someone say once, you're paid to rest and recover. Because you do your job well when you do that. Mfundo, thank you so much for that presentation. I want to get to some of these questions before we close out because I think time's almost ended. So let me get to one or two of them. So Sophocles says, thanks for insights. What strategies can South African leaders employ to lead with purpose, ensuring their actions are aligned with the broader goals of social transformation and ethical governance? We'll also get these poll results to you once we're finished. I don't know if you can get to that question.
Yes, it's a very important question and very relevant for where we find ourselves as a country and a nation. The key is to remind ourselves all the time, about our purpose, what it is that we're looking for. We really seek to grow and develop our country so that it takes its place among the world community of nations, that we use that growth and development to resolve, I suppose, development gaps of the past, to bring the mainstream of our population through so that they are effective participants in our economy. Everything that we do has to be measured against that yardstick. And so even for political leadership, they are not there for self-glorification. They are there as servants of the people, always having to discharge their responsibilities and measure themselves by the extent to which they're taking our society forward. One thing I would say, most of the challenges that we face as a nation are unlikely to be resolved at the same level of thinking and effort that created them in the first place. They will have to be resolved at a higher and different level of thinking. In this respect, we will have to leverage technologies, modern technologies, to attend to some of the problems that we have. We will have to think differently. In some respects, we have an opportunity to leapfrog to the new desired status for our nation. But it's all going to require underpin of sound ethical foundation, rigor in holding one another accountable, enforcement of the disciplines and laws in our own country. And we have sound constitution as the platform to use as our springboard. And so where we probably have sold ourselves short is not the platform itself, is the rigor in enforcing those disciplines. And that is where the shift has to happen.
Thank you for that. Tabaleng had a question. It was, in today's political climate, change happens faster than leaders and their teams can expect. How realistic is it for leaders to keep their teams focused towards the organizational strategic vision and purpose?
Well, in a sense, the purpose does not, purpose and vision perhaps do not change frequently. And so that gives you the North Star and something to strive for. What will change over time are the strategies of getting there. And so the strategy itself must be open to change. Otherwise, it falls behind and is unhelpful in the accomplishment of the goal. And so that is what leaders ought to do, to reinforce the purpose and vision as the North Star we're driving towards, and then imprint on the team the need to refresh strategy, to change if conditions in the environment change, to change in response to competitors who may come in with different approaches. And so strategy itself is a living document that changes from time to time. It changes not only as a document, but as a practice. So even in its execution, it should be agile enough to respond to changing environments. And that is how leaders ought to balance the commitment to a purpose, as well as how that purpose is delivered through an agile strategy.
I've got another question here from Mina, and we're going to have to close it off there. I know there's some other questions coming in, and we're already over time, but some team members may mistake compassion for permission to underperform, avoid responsibility, or manipulate dynamics. What can leaders do when empathy gets abused? That
We do
never
know the
happens.
notion of a two-sided coin. Yes, all of these things have their shadow side. So an empathetic, compassionate leader must at the same time be alive to the risk that that could be abused. And if it is abused and underperformance recorded, the leader still has to be tough to deal with that underperformance for what it is directly. And that as a leader, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're always being observed by others. They are observing how true you are to the undertakings you've made up front. And here, you would have had a contract with your team on things to achieve. Here's one player not achieving those, underperforming, and the rest of the team is looking to you to deal with that. So you have to have and demonstrate the courage of your convictions to act as appropriate in the circumstances. And that will mean reinforcing with the team player that they're falling short. And if they persist, taking the necessary disciplinary steps. Being compassionate and empathetic does not restrict or eliminate the need to be tough against underperformance.
Mfundo, it has once again been amazing to get your wise words and wisdom from a great leader. I'd like everybody just to give a round of applause in your chat. Thank you so much, Mfundo, and we hope to be seeing you soon. I know we've got the Nedbank Top Empowerment Conference on the 31st of July and the 1st of August, and the awards on the 31st of July. I'm not sure if you're going to be joining us live. I know you're a busy man, but we're very, very grateful for your wisdom.
Thank you, Ralf. Appreciate that. Thank you for a lovely afternoon and probing questions. And I hope the audience found the masterclass useful and helpful. And I will go through some of the questions too to learn from your thought processes, both questions and comments. We can only grow through interacting with one another.
Great. Thanks so much.
Lovely.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you, Mfundo. Bye.